starting to get interesting. We actually had a white panel van sitting out in front of our house, blocking our driveway for a while. During the middle of my interview right now, earlier on the radio, and I'm assuming that they were doing a Wi-Fi sniff, but I think it's getting serious.
Were you followed in here?
If so, they would have had a lot of fun because I was kind of driving like a banshee.
Just for the record, whenever you called and asked about the face mask, if you needed it, somebody called in the room and started asking who I was without identifying himself.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, anyway.
Well, I've got encryption on this. We're supposed to be from Deaf USA, so I have had it tapped before.
Really?
When I was running for governor, we got a transcript of one of my phone calls with one of the senior Trump officials within an hour of making that call. So, we're playing in the big boy league.
Okay. Well, let's get started.
Sure.
Okay. The date is Monday, November 9th, 2020, and we are in Farmington Hills, Michigan. I'm here with former Senator Patrick Colbeck. Would you please tell me how to spell your last name, sir?
Yeah, C-O-L, B as in boy, E-C-K.
Okay. Thank you very much. Senator Colbeck, what days this year were you involved with the election?
Well, in the lead up to it, I helped form an organization called the Election Integrity Fund. It's part of what I call the Michigan Grassroots Alliance, which is part of a 501c4 called the Rocket Fuel Fund. And so the lead up to this was quite a few days beforehand. And as a former member of the Michigan Senate Election to Government Reform Committee, where I served as vice chair, I was spun up on that quite a bit in my second term in the Michigan Senate. So
could I get you to raise your voice just a little bit for me?
Yeah, sorry. And so in regards to being on site at the AV Counting Board with the city of Detroit, I arrived around 5 o'clock on November 3rd, which is election day, and didn't depart till after 5:30 on the day after. So it was a marathon session, to say the least.
5:30 in the afternoon?
Yeah.
Okay, so you're there a full 24
Oh,
hours.
yeah. And I might mention, because of the stuff that was going on, I did not need any caffeine supplements.
Understood. Well, we'd be interested to hear more about what was going on down there.
Yep.
So this was at the TCF Center, correct?
Yeah, TCF facility, yep.
Okay. Can you tell us what things were like when you first got there on election day? What was going on?
Well, it was pretty straightforward registration. You just walk into the facility downstairs, and it seemed everything was calm. You check in, you go through a temperature check. They had a little health screening desk, and then you came in to the kind of a poll challenger reception area where they go off and validate what your identification was, and then they check you in. Nobody was being checked out, which plays into some of the things that happened the next day. But they'll check you in and validate your credentials. And I was credentialed as a poll challenger with the Election Integrity Fund.
Okay. You mentioned the temperature checks. Do
Yeah.
you happen to remember who was performing those checks?
They looked like nurse assistants or something like that, sitting out in the lobby as you get in.
Okay. Any chance they were affiliated with the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, or?
It's possible. I mean, I can't verify what their affiliation was. All I know is somebody stuck a little probe on my forehead and said I was good enough to go by.
Gotcha. Okay, so you got there, you got checked in.
Yeah.
What was your official role while you were there?
As a poll challenger,
Okay.
and as far as which the responsibility for the poll challenger is to ensure that all the election processes are followed accurately. And if you see anything that's being abridged, then you're supposed to bring it to the attention of one of the election officials, particularly the chairperson of any voter precinct, or a lot of my communications were with some of the head election officials, which Daniel Baxter was the head of, he was the senior representative for Janice Winfrey at this counting board, at the AV Counting Board. He was supported by former state representative David Nathan. And then also Chris Thomas was a special consultant or special counsel to Janice Winfrey, who's a Detroit City Clerk. So those are kind of the three main people up on the stage, if you will, up in the center of the counting board.
Let me break in right quick, if I may. Just so everybody's clear in our audience, do you happen to know the party affiliation of the officials you just described?
Well, I know David Nathan was officially a Democrat. I know Chris Thomas has served in administrations for both Republicans and Democrats. He's very knowledgeable on election systems. And I have no idea on Daniel Baxter. I believe, and this is something worth pursuing, I believe his wife is a judge in the area as well. And I have a friend of mine who's done some research on some financial connections to things like the voting system that might be worth pursuing.
Okay. Interesting. So also, just because most of our audience may not have ever worked in an election before.
Yeah.
Let
me give the lay of the land. Yeah.
Yeah. When you're a poll challenger.
Yeah.
What specifically are the types of things you're supposed to be aware of that may be happening but aren't supposed to?
Number one, you've got to verify. All right, let's take a step back just a little bit. And from an election process, there's 4 key election artifacts that everybody needs to be aware of.
Okay.
All right. Number one, you've got what in Michigan we call a qualified voter file. It's a voter registration file. So everybody who's eligible to vote in that upcoming election is supposed to be put into that file.
Now, is it electronic or physical?
It's electronic, and it's physical, and it's non-existent, according to Detroit City Workers, and we'll get into that in a little bit. So there are essentially 3 different versions of that file, and it's complicated a little bit by a ballot initiative that was passed in Michigan back in 2018, which allowed for same-day voter registration.
Okay.
All right, so when you do the 4 artifacts, the key artifacts that need to be under configuration control and chain of custody are qualified voter file, poll books, which are essentially a precinct by precinct extract of that qualified voter file, and then the ballot itself, and then the tally of the ballots. So those are.
Sorry, I hate to interrupt you, but just to be clear, I think you said that all of these are supposed to be under a chain of custody.
Yes.
Okay, can you describe what that means?
A chain of custody means that every time one of these things gets handed off to another entity that participates or a poll worker in the election process, there's got to be some sort of verification of the integrity of that handoff. So,
similar to a detective handling evidence in a criminal case before the court of law.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, all this should be treated with that sort of scrutiny, if you will. And there's a lot of statutes on the books right now that require both a Republican and a Democrat to be present at many of these handoffs that verify chain of custody. And we'll get into that a little bit later, but that was not the case in Detroit. And I can tell you that we submitted, and a lot of people provided their names to work in Detroit as poll workers, and they were never contacted or they were outright rejected.
So do you feel that there were insufficient Republicans
Absolutely.
who were working as paid poll workers?
Yes, and I want to differentiate. There's a lot of different roles that are out there, right? So you got poll watchers, which are essentially, just as the name implies, they can't talk to anybody. They can just sit in the back and take notes. You don't need certification for that. You can just be an interested party going off and looking at that. Then there's poll challengers, such as myself, which were actually trained to go off in the election processes and monitor what's going on so that we had the ability to go off and talk to the chairperson of each one of the precincts, or in my case, talk to some of the senior Detroit election officials. And then there are poll workers. And frankly, poll workers are the most valuable players of this whole process from my perspective.
Did they actually perform the tabulation?
They're the ones who actually run the ballots through the tabulator. They're the ones who verify the identity of a voter in the poll book. They're the ones who are supposed to seal everything up at the end of the day. Everything, and it's always supposed to be a Republican and Democrat. I can tell you, I know of only 3 Republicans that were present at all in the Detroit AD counting board out of 134 counting boards. And that's not even including the tabulators or the adjudication stations.
So you're talking about only 3 poll workers.
Yeah, so paid employees, only 3 that could have a legitimate R next to their name.
Well, I think there's been some questions about this in the media, and from what I understand, some of the officials have come back and said, well, we didn't have enough Republican applicants.
We did. And we've got folks that can attest to that, and I can, anybody who's pursuing that line of reasoning, we can debunk that pretty quick.
So what was happening to these people when they were applying to be a poll worker?
That's a good question for Janice Winfrey, the Detroit City Clerk.
When someone applies to be a poll worker, are they required to declare their party affiliation?
I think before I don't know if it's when they apply, whether or not they're, I don't know that part of the process, so that can be verified. But I know before they're allowed to serve, they have to declare party affiliation.
I see.
And I'm assuming it's part of the application process, but I can't verify that.
Okay. But do you believe that that party affiliation declaration may have been used in any sort of improper manner?
Well, I can tell you, all I can say for sure is that the people that we had put with Republican affiliation to work as poll workers, to man those 134 plus counting boards, as well as the adjudication stations, we were not sufficiently represented in any way, shape, or form.
Do you know approximately how many Republicans applied?
Well, I don't know how many applied. I know, I know there's at least just a paper trail that I've seen so far from people indicates at least 3 others that I know of. Now, it's not huge, but that's only me just doing an arbitrary sifting where people are telling me anecdotally. The primary contacts to ask that question would be Marion Sheridan with the GOP and Janice Daniels with the Election Integrity Fund. Marion, I would start with Marion because she seems to be collecting a database on that right now.
Okay.
All right.
So what else did you see going on election day?
So first thing that I did when I went into the election areas, I was going to be focused on more of the big picture items that are going to impact all the different operations. And I turned into the de facto floor general, if you will, going off and highlighting what we're seeing at all the different stations and warning all the other poll challengers, look out for this, look out for this, look out for that. That's what I ended up doing for pretty much most of the night, making sure that we had all the key stations where there were activities ongoing, make sure we had resources deployed at that station. But before I got into that mode of operation, the first thing I did is I went to Chris Thomas and I asked about that tabulation mechanism.
The tabulation mechanism. What was your question about?
So I asked specifically, Chris, how are the votes transferred from this gets into a chain of custody discussion. How are the votes transferred from the tabulating scanners, and which have a computer desktop dedicated to them? How are they transferred from that desktop machine that's for the scanner to the county or all points elsewhere, like media outlets, etc., for all those nice little updates that everybody keeps hitting the refresh button on for their browser? And he said he couldn't tell me. Now, mind you, this is somebody with decades worth of experience. This is somebody that understands the importance of that particular step of the process, and he could not tell me.
Just from the audience's point of view, I mean, people are seeing the results of the voting process coming up in places like the New York Times website.
Yeah.
In theory, that data's got to be coming there from somewhere, and you're trying to find out exactly how it's being transmitted out.
Here's the way it works in a lot of smaller precincts, and you're going to see a lot of things when it comes to Detroit in particular that are always the exception, not the rule. But the rule generally is that you don't report out the precinct vote tallies until the precinct has been closed out, sealed, balanced, which means that you've got the people have verified that the number of ballots equal the number of people that said that you said had voted versus a poll book, which is kind of your log as people sign in. If those balance, i.e. there's zero discrepancy, plus or minus on it, then you've got a balanced book and you can report out what the vote tallies are for that precinct, and that's what you're supposed to do. That never happened in Detroit. None of those precincts balanced. They were never put up on the wall, yet somehow people were reporting out what the vote tallies were. And I wanted to understand before the evening, before the reports even started. This is like 3 hours before polls closed. So none of those results should have been posted anywhere. And frankly, even after that, because none of these polls were closed out, how the heck are they getting those numbers out there?
They were getting a real-time number out of there, right?
I don't know if it was real time. And this gets into why the next thing that I did after chasing that down, which was check the internet connectivity and verify that none of these computers were connected to the internet.
Are they supposed to be connected to the internet?
No, they're not supposed to be connected to the internet. That's an immediate breach of security. They have hacker conferences pretty much every year to go off and demonstrate how bad an idea that is and how you can corrupt an election system like that.
Okay, so what did you find when you went to check this out?
So when I went through there, what I did is I checked out the wired connectivity between the tabulators and the adjudicators and also the election official computers. And what I noted was that the tabulators were all connected to a router underneath there's two legs of the tabulator machine. Maybe just give a general layout. When you walk into this AV counting board, there's a whole bunch of tables spread out all over the place, and those correlate to 134 counting, what they call them is AV counting boards, and each AV counting board is a superset of anywhere from 2 to 5 precincts and just the absentee ballots for that particular precinct. Those are all across the area. Each one of them has a poll book connected to a display that's positioned so that the poll challenger can actually watch what's going on the poll worker's screen when they're moving the ballots through the process on that table. So that's part of the IT configuration. The other part is when you get to a batch size of 50 on your ballots for each one of those little counting boards on it, you're supposed to bring them over to the tabulator station, which is actually you physically walk the ballots over to that tabulator station, and then they're supposed to run it through the scanner.
Okay.
All right, and then that information is captured, and because this is networked, you can ostensibly have that data rolled up to any computer that is connected to that tabulator. Now, I can see in some circumstances where it would make sense to connect that to what's known as an adjudicator workstation.
Like some sort of local area network.
Yeah, but this one was set up, well, that would be just a dedicated connection to that one device.
Okay.
But what was seen here is that they're all connected to a central router, which means any computer could be connected to any other computer. And so I saw that connectivity going through that router. There was actually a 3 main router stages that I witnessed personally. So the tabulators were connected to a main router. It appeared to be dedicated for the tabulators, and then they were connected in turn to another router near the stage where everything was all connected.
How do you know that data was actually being transmitted over these lines?
I can't, because I have no way of going off and touching the computers. And I'll tell you, when I went underneath to go off and look at this, I mean, I wanted to get up close and personal, make sure I understood exactly the routing. Their IT tech, the IT manager that was there, raised quite a fuss about it. And as it turns out, that person, I've been told, is a co-owner of Dominion Voting Systems. So we had the head honcho, or one of the head honchos, at the Detroit AV Counting Board. His first name is Nick, and I don't know his last name. We've got an affidavit to that effect, and we can share that.
So tell me more about the company Dominion.
Oh, that's a whole separate rabbit hole. So let's maybe finish the configuration first, because Dominion's the same computer system was used up in Antrim Antrim County, where they identified a 6,000 vote switch due to what they call a software glitch.
Yeah, let's come back to that. That's interesting. But so tell me more about the configuration that you were exploring.
So all these computers, also, by the way, we traced a connection from the wall that appeared to be, it was a white Cat5 cable that came through the wall and appeared to be routed to one of the main routers at the center stage, where all the workstations for the election officials were. And that router was in turn connected to the other upstream routers. So when you're connected like that, everybody's connected, and that's just the way it works. I mean, if you're on a LAN and you got one computer connected to LAN, all the rest of them are going to be connected in the LAN. In addition to that, initially I thought that the poll books out at those different counting boards, 134 counting boards, were not connected to the internet. But I did observe on all the pillars, they had Wi-Fi routers active all across the board. I actually can show you too on my phone snapshots of the active Wi-Fi connections that were out there. And one of them happened to be named AV_counter.
Interesting. So you had wired connections between the tabulators and the computers, and also wireless Wi-Fi connections going on.
Potentially. I never verified the wireless connections because I didn't see that till later, and by that time we had other fish to fry. But I was able to validate the physical connections, and from an IT deployment perspective, it makes sense that you got 134 of these stations. You don't want to run cables to all of them because they're distributed all around. You got to tape them up on the floor, make sure nobody trips over them and all that kind of stuff. So it makes sense that it's a lot easier for them to just connect them to Wi-Fi instead, which is a likely scenario, but I can't confirm that. What I can confirm is that all of the monitors that were in the tabulator and adjudicator area, all those workstations, They all had that good old internet connectivity icon active, or LAN connection icon in the bottom right-hand corner. And I've done some tests on it because it can vary. Microsoft's changed their status a few times on how they want to portray it, but it's consistent with internet connectivity is the icon status we saw on all those monitors. And if it's not connected to the internet, there's a very explicit icon that says it's a little globe, crosshatch globe with a little crosshatch on a symbol on the bottom saying you're not connected. So when I got in there and I saw that configuration, I asked the head election official, Daniel Baxter, are these computers connected to the internet? And he said simply no. Later on, I saw former state representative David Nathan. And I said, David served with me when I was in the Michigan Senate in my first term. And I said, David, is this connected to the internet? And he goes, no. I go, well, I'm seeing indications that they are connected, and I'd like to be able to verify that. And he says, no, you got to trust me. I go, all right, you may have been told a lie that they're not connected. I would like you to go off and verify it. And all you got to do is move that little cursor over that symbol, and it'll say connected to internet or not. And he says, you're just going to have to trust me. Well, David, if you're listening, I don't trust you. And the stakes are too high for this right now. The whole idea of whether or not it's connected to the internet or not could have been dispensed with in 1 second, just with somebody moving their cursor over there. They chose not to do that. It wouldn't have interfered with any election processes, the integrity of any of the data that was on there, nothing. It was the most simple thing for them to do to verify election integrity, and they refused to do it. Multiple people refused to do it.
Who actually refused your request?
Well, David Nathan refused the request, and I got to be careful on this because Chris Thomas, I can't remember if I specifically asked him about the internet connection or not, to tell you the truth. I was so focused on the tabulation with him. I bugged him about so many different things throughout the night. I'm almost positive I asked him about the internet as well, but I can't confirm that.
How about this person, Nick, that you mentioned?
Nick was saying, I didn't ask him that. He was the one shooing me away, saying, get away from the cables. Nothing to see here. These aren't the droids you're looking for.
Okay.
So that's the sum total of this. And I've got other people, Christina Karamos and Randy Bishop, that can confirm the internet icons on the different computers.
Okay.
But in addition to that, what we did notice was we had an incident report early on the day, on election day, on November 3rd at 10 o'clock in the morning. A friend of mine I trust, who's a lawyer, she was actually present when one of the poll workers got pretty excited about a message that popped up on her screen. And this is at one of the counting boards. So this is where the electronic poll books are posted.
On her computer screen.
On her computer screen. And it says, warning, this system is being hacked. Wow. And I have been told, and this is more anecdotal because I don't have the formal affidavit in front of me. I was talking to my lawyer friend. She was going to be putting together an affidavit, so that'll be in the record somewhere.
Okay.
But at the same time that happened, we had a little error message pop up in Antrim County called a software glitch now. So on November 3rd, around 10 a.m. in Antrim County, that's about the time where I've been told, and I don't have the affidavit to that effect right now, that's about the same time where they experienced their quote-unquote software glitch, which is interesting. So
yes, it is.
And which is also why whether or not these were connected to the internet is important. Because now all of a sudden, we're not talking about just one city. We're not even just talking about one county. We're talking potentially a statewide issue, and it was just detected in 2 different areas. And while we're at it, why stop at just one state? Could this be happening in Pennsylvania? Could this be happening in Georgia, North Carolina, Wisconsin?
Are you aware of any similarities in terms of software?
I've been in, Dominion Voting Systems, which is the software that's used in the city of Detroit. It's also the same software platform used in Antrim County, where we saw the quote-unquote glitch. They're in, I think, 30 states all across the country. And I don't know specific states that they're used in. But even then, what I'm told for folks that know this a little bit better, the core source code for all these voting systems are all pretty much the same. And they got different front ends on them. So, and so it's back end that's connecting to the database, that's the most important part of all this. That's what can be manipulated. If it has a common data schema across the board for all those, I mean, you just need to know one of them to know all of them.
Right.
So that's part of the concern around that internet connectivity. And this could impact more than just one.
Is the software that is used for these kinds of tabulation systems, is it open source? Is there any way someone can go and verify to make sure it's secure, much like you do with, say, the Linux kernel or something like that? Or is it proprietary?
All attempts at standardizing a set of security protocols around elections have been pushed aside, and nobody's ever gotten any traction on it.
Do you know why? Like, what is the concern?
That's a good question. And I can't answer that. I mean, it was a national effort that I know of, and I was working at the state level. I do know when I was serving in the Michigan Senate, like I said, I was vice chair of Senate Elections Reform. I was denied access to they refused to allow me to have a committee hearing where we would actually go through all these process flow diagrams for each step of the election process, everything from registering, and this is under a Republican leadership. So this is not just Democrat, this is under Senator Arlen Meekoff, who was our Senate Majority Leader, and Senator Dave Robertson, who was the chair of that committee. So this is back in 2016 timeframe in the wake of the Jill Stein recount here in Michigan. And
so Republican leadership prevented you, the committee chairman, vice chair, from holding hearings about that would bring public information out about these processes for voting software.
Right, and where they were involved, and not just voting software, it was the overall election process. So we would go through, how do you register to vote? How do you vote absentee? How do you vote at the polls? How do you certify an election? How do you close out a precinct? So we would walk through every single step of the way. And so essentially that chain of custody, we mapped out that chain throughout that whole process. And we thought it was important to go over it in the context of a committee hearing back in 2016 so we could fix it, so we can get into this craziness that we're in right now.
So how was that denial communicated to you?
By the committee chair.
You were just told, no, you can't do this?
Yeah, and there's a whole bunch of bad blood that I didn't initiate between me and the Senate Majority Leader, that it could have been blacklisted for a reason. But I've been working with Catherine Engelbrecht at True the Vote, if you're familiar with her, and for a long time, and got a lot of respect for her. And we were ready to have her testify at these committee hearings, and they didn't want to have it.
Wow. Would you like to take a quick break?
No, I'm good. If you need to take a break, go for it.
No, I'm fine. I just want to.
No, I've got so many things to do that but it's valuable to get this information out here.
Sure.
A lot of this stuff, as you can tell, is not soundbite stuff, right?
Right.
If you really want to understand what's going on in this, it's not a matter of, hey, put it into 30 seconds or less. I mean, there are some bumper stickers you can get out there. That's why people are focusing on stories about watermarks and stuff like that, because it's easy to put on a bumper sticker. Right. Diagramming out an election process, identifying key control artifacts, it's not exactly the exciting stuff that appears on nightly news.
Right. So is there anything else that was concerning to you about the technological aspect you want to cover before we move on?
Well, now we get into the Dominion voting systems in general.
Yes.
And you got to raise the question, why was the owner of that company present for the majority of the night in Detroit, including kind of the more interesting points in time in Detroit, which is the midnight time frame, midnight to 3 a.m. or whatever, when coincidentally, I think all across all the main battleground states, they all took a stop on vote tallies. And so
that person was present in Detroit?
Yes. That Nick.
It's the same person.
Yeah, same person.
Okay.
And so, and I want to point out, there were ballots to count during that time frame. All right, we had military ballots that were sitting up on stage, I think since at least like 11 o'clock at night or whatever. And military ballots, just, are special ballots because they come in a non-standard format that can't be read by the tabulators. And there's about 12 of these boxes sitting up on the stage. And
about how many in each box?
No idea. I mean, they all came in different form. So it's not like I could look at it and do an old gumball contest where you guess the number of gumballs on a gumball machine. It's not that easy because they're all non-standard, even within the military. But the reason that that's important is because it takes a long time to go off and do these ballots, because every one of these military ballots has to be duplicated.
Right.
And so it's interesting to note that at a time when we had all the poll workers twiddling their thumbs sitting idle, we had critical mass on poll challengers early in the evening, at least around this. They could have witnessed some of this. They chose to do nothing until the next morning. And they wouldn't do the poll. And by the way, why this is important, when you're going off and duplicating a ballot, so you're taking what the military personnel said they voted on, you have to translate it to a new duplicate ballot. So there's actual physical transfer where you sit there and go, okay, they voted for Trump here, they better vote for Trump here. If you don't have both a Republican and a Democrat witnessing that, what are the odds that somebody who's afflicted with Trump derangement syndrome is going to find it in themselves to go off and fill in the Trump oval on the other one? Not likely. And so unless they're held accountable by having somebody looking over their shoulder and making sure that happens, and by the way, it's against the law for them to do that. But that goes back to the issue with the number of Republican poll workers that were allowed to be active at the polls.
So you described a situation where it sounds like there wasn't a whole lot of tabulation going on at a certain point.
Yeah, at that time.
And what time frame was this again?
This is like between midnight and roughly midnight and 3:45 a.m., which is when this truck pulled up in the back with about an estimated 38,000 ballots from 61 mail bins got dropped off in the middle of the night.
So midnight after election day through the following morning when this happened.
Yeah.
And okay, so tell me about this drop off of ballots.
So the drop off of ballots, and it came out at the back door of the election center. Some reports indicate that there were two other vehicles there at the same time, and I don't know if there's affidavits to that effect. I can say that me personally, I went back there and I witnessed a little mini panel truck, if you will, with Detroit Elections Bureau regalia all over the side. It had a vehicle ID number on it. I didn't capture that, but we had other people that captured that information and the license plate number associated with it. It looked legit. And inside of it were and this gets into some chain of custody discussions. There's no verification that there was a Republican and a Democrat during transfer. We don't know that they didn't take side stops to a nearby Coney Island to pick up a few more ballots from their buddies. We have no way of verifying any of that information.
Are you supposed to be able to have that information?
We're supposed to be able to, have verification of that all the way along the line. The whole chain of custody, we're supposed to be there, and because they were not sealed. If they were sealed, all this stuff was sealed, and you verified the seal, and then when you came to another destination and you see the seal still intact, all right, that's okay.
So that's what the verification is supposed to look like.
That's what we're supposed to see. Yeah, when I do it in the suburbs where I was a senator, when I saw that come in, we had pretty much a whole army that would get out of a van, get out there, pull up all the data from the precinct, put it in the van under configuration control. Everything was sealed up with the tape and put out there. There was probably one of the most egregious aspects of what happened in the city of Detroit at the AV County Board was the utter lack of respect for chain of custody. And I'm talking not just physical chain of custody, but as we were discussing before, electronic chain of custody as well.
I see. So you just got a vehicle coming in with bins full of votes.
Yep, 61.
Open top bins.
Yep.
61 boxes?
Yep, about 61. That's what we've got an affidavit on. 61 boxes.
About how many ballots would probably be in each box, roughly?
I think that works out if you put it into, you're going to test my math skills on this, but I think it's roughly around 600 ballots per bin.
Okay.
And so here,
so you alerted other people.
Put my conspiratorial hat on for a second, and just say, interesting how they all stopped at the same time. So by midnight, they probably all knew what their targets were in regards to how many votes they had to drudge up.
Stopping meaning stopping the tabulation.
Yeah, starting the counts.
And they had votes there that they could have been tabulated.
Yeah, military ballots could have been counted, but they tell a different narrative because usually military is going to be 80-20 for Donald Trump.
Why weren't they counting those ballots?
Good question. It's tedious because number one, they come in, you got to figure out what precinct they go to. For me, from a management perspective, I would use downtime to go off and do these tedious things to say, guys, I got all this personnel here right now. Let's put them to use and go off and parse them out. They did not count the military ballots until the next morning when people like myself who went up to a break room to go off and train the next batch of poll challengers, we tried to get back in. We're locked out of coming back into the facility due to the county.
Who locked you out?
The Detroit Elections Bureau folks, and ultimately they wouldn't let us in the main door, and I got footage of them blocking us out of there.
So Detroit Elections Bureau locked Republicans out of the place where
Yes.
you were supposed to be watching the vote tabulation.
Yes.
Would the votes being tabulated at that time you were locked out include those
Military
that had
votes.
been the military votes? Would that have also included these ballots that came
Potentially,
late?
yes. Yeah. Yeah. And I can't say because I wasn't physically there. I was up training the other folks. So I can't say what remained of the 38,000 that was there. But it's conceivable it could have been part of the counting there.
Now, the Detroit Elections Bureau, apparently, they're the ones that locked you out. But I think you said earlier that this panel truck that delivered these unsecured ballots in the middle of the night, these 61 boxes of ballots, that panel truck also had an emblem for the Detroit Elections Bureau on it.
Yes.
Is that normal? Are they the ones that
It
usually
shouldn't
deliver
be. I mean,
the votes?
because
Those usually come from the post
well,
office?
here's what complicates matters. We have a ballot drop boxes throughout the city of Detroit. And by the way, there's a Facebook connection in there. Mark Zuckerberg put $250 million towards an organization that prior to this had never seen more than $700,000 or $900,000 in its bank account ever. I think they're called the Center for Civic and Tech Life.
What was their role?
What they did is they provided grant money to local units of government. This grant money went exclusively to Democrat areas, which is also a violation. And I won't even get it. Did I talk to you about Rock the Vote?
No, we spoke about it before the interview, but I'd like to get to that.
Okay. So, I mean, they were doing whatever they could to tilt the teeter-totter into their favor the whole night long. And this is just another example. So it's conceivable. We don't have verification of this because, once again, there is zero chain of custody going on here. I know from my communications with a Detroit News reporter that the Detroit Elections Bureau verified or said that those ballots came from the Detroit Elections Bureau. We don't know where they came from to get to the Detroit Elections Bureau, or at least I don't know where they were. But one of the opportunities is that they picked them up from some of these unsecured, dubiously monitored drop boxes all across the city. And so we don't know where these came from. And why that's important is because later on, some of the activities that we were called to engage in, remember we were talking about the different control artifacts. One of them was a poll book. A lot of these ballots didn't show up in the poll book. They didn't show up in the electronic poll book, and then they didn't show up in these paper supplements that were supposed to represent these same-day voter registrations. So if they weren't in either one of them, how did they get counted? So one of the challenges that I was making sure that all of our poll challengers did that were active that night was saying anytime they put a ballot into that problem ballot box, which is many of the poll workers, and I want to make this clear, many of the poll workers that were out there were just trying to do their job. And most of them did so without complaining, without too much pushback on poll challengers. They knew we were all trying to row together in it. There were some that were problematic, but I would say that's the exception, not the rule. But what happened is when all these got deposited in these poll problem ballots bin, if you will, is that all these problem ballots bin, we were told, turned into, they went back to the Detroit city clerk to go off and screen them. Then they all came back later in the day and they started manually entering in the data into the poll book. And all the county boards were manually entering in the data from ostensibly, now because of chain of custody, we can't say for sure that it was all the 38,000 ballots, but it certainly looked like they just went through a little loop-de-loop with the city clerk's office, and they, even though they were problem ballots, they shouldn't have been counted, they should have been discarded. Instead, they turned it back around and said, no, we're going to insert these into the tabulator.
And you witnessed this?
I had people that did witness it. I wasn't. So, I mean, I witnessed people typing things in there, but because I didn't capture ballot numbers and anything, I didn't sign an affidavit. I did witness the activity of them manually entering in poll book data into the electronic poll book.
Is that normal?
Entering data into the poll book it's usually reserved for annotations, to sit there and say, hey, we had a misfeed on this ballot number. So please, I know it's counted twice, but the second one's the one that counts.
Okay.
So you are supposed to do some entries into the poll book in that context. That's why the electronic is convenient. Or if we as a poll challenger make a challenge, that's supposed to be entered into the poll book as well. But what was happening here was different because they were actually creating the entries for who the registered voters should be on election day.
Why does the system even allow them to create registered voters on election day at the tabulation center?
I can't say that for sure. I mean,
could you imagine, just off the top of your head, could there be a legitimate reason why they would create a registered voter record on, not even at a polling center, but at a tabulation place?
In context of our new same-day voter registration stipulation in our Constitution, you could make a case for them being able to go off and do that. It still gets down to how did you verify the identity of that voter? And the way you're supposed to do it is with the signature. Nobody's supposed to be able to vote absentee without having their signature matched on the ballot envelope with their signature in the poll book.
So and
they weren't entering signatures into that poll book.
And because nothing at the tabulation center is supposed to be connected to the internet, there would not be a way to create a registered voter record on election day at the polling place electronically, correct?
Yeah, well, that gets into that uncovers something that we have anecdotal evidence of, but the only way to prove it happened is after a recount. But we have evidence to suggest that people that voted late absentee, so their ballots arrived after the QVF was downloaded into the electronic poll books, which probably, I think it happened Sunday night from what I was told. So if you got your absentee ballot received any time after that, or maybe it wasn't updated in time for that extract, for example, you could go to the poll, vote in person, and you could have your absentee ballot count. So there are people able to vote twice. So I guess some people are more important than others.
Interesting. Okay, let's go back to where you got locked out.
And by the way, the reason for that is because you don't have the poll book synced.
Right.
If you're doing it at one precinct, oops, that guy already voted. Sorry, you can't do it. We do have incidents of people saying that they came in person to vote, and then they found out that somebody had already voted for them.
Do we have affidavits from those people?
The people that have come to me have asked them for the affidavits. I haven't followed up to see that they've actually filed an affidavit. But I would be surprised if there weren't affidavits. I went to the Republican Party had a little affidavit party, if you will, yesterday out in Livonia, which is nearby here, just city to the south, and it was packed with people making affidavits around voter irregularities. It seems like I've been kind of a funnel for all these things, and I know I've seen that come through my mailbox. I just said get an affidavit whenever I saw that, so I can't say I can't verify that they filed the affidavit.
Understand?
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to go back to what you were talking about earlier when you said that the elections officials locked the Republican poll challengers out of the tabulation center. So
not all of them.
Not all
there were a handful in there, but remember, there's 134 counting boards, and I think maybe we had less than a dozen poll challengers with Republican credentials, or my organization, which is Election Integrity Fund, that would at least ensure an independent oversight on it. It was a handful.
Well, two questions. What was the atmosphere like immediately before you guys were locked out? And two, what was their justification for doing so?
The atmosphere I can attest to because I was upstairs doing the poll challenger training. I do know that once we found out about it, the atmosphere was pretty ticked off. Because we had a whole bunch of new poll challengers arrive to kind of spell the people like myself that had been there all night long. And it was kind of frustrating that they weren't allowed to have access in there. We had people that were blocked from even getting into the facility by the police that wouldn't be allowed into the facility. These were people that were going to be poll challengers for this. They refused to allow them access to it. So that part, I can't verify exactly what happened there. And what was the second part of your question?
What was their justification for locking the Republicans out? Or was there a blanket lockout that says nobody can come in? Or was it just
exceeded COVID capacity? And remember I was telling you how this would play later on when you actually did the registration, and I came in as a poll challenger. I went to a central desk and said, "Here's my credentials," and I got they gave me a pass to let me in there. Nobody ever checked out of there. So what they were ostensibly doing is they were looking at the list of all the people that had checked in, and which didn't keep track of it when they checked out. But they used that as a base, not actual physical counting of the people inside there. They used their checklist as a basis for saying, nope, we're beyond capacity.
So if they locked the doors now,
Yeah.
why wasn't this lockout affecting Democrats as well?
Good question. They did open the doors eventually and let in a few people from certain area. I mean, and they just let in a batch, ostensibly after they've gone off and did a head count in there. Can't say that for sure. But here's the other thing that they did. While they're counting military ballots without Republican challenger oversights or independent challenger oversights from like the Election Integrity Fund, they put cardboard over the windows so nobody could look in.
Who put cardboard up?
Some of the folks inside, it must have been election officials inside the counting board. And I got pictures of this I can share to you.
Oh, yes, we'd like to see this. Why did they do this? Was there
I'm sure it wasn't in the interest of a free and fair election that's transparent to all onlookers.
And there were people outside who
Yeah.
were looking in through
Yeah.
these windows?
Yeah.
Were they breaking the windows?
I don't know. There were people that were pissed off and they were definitely banging on the windows, but
Weren't even broken that you saw?
not that I saw. No, I mean, in general, most of our protesters, when we protest, we're singing God Bless America. We're not the folks that are going off and overturning police cars and throwing Molotov cocktails. That's the other side.
Right. Okay. So some of the elections officials have been asked about this issue.
Yeah.
And their response has been, oh, well, there is an equal number of Democrat and Republican poll challengers at all times.
No.
Not true?
No, not true.
Not even technically true in some way.
Well, I'm going to be careful. Definitely not true on the poll worker side, which is directly tied to statute that they're required to go off and have a balance on it. So from a poll worker perspective, that's not true. When a poll challenger perspective, I can tell you overnight we had, between Election Integrity Fund and the Republican Party, we had maybe 30 poll challengers, I think, overnight for the kind of the wee hours of the night. And remember, 134 counting boards, but most of them weren't active, so it wasn't a big issue at that point in time.
Okay. But the next day,
when it really mattered, when they actually did resume the counting, that's when they blocked us out and prohibited access into the process, which frankly, for me, this invalidates the whole election process in that counting board.
So how many Republicans were down there working as poll challengers while the rest of you were locked out?
That's a good question. Best answered by either Tim Griffin or I think my friend Bob Cushman was in there at the time too.
Okay.
But I think when I asked him, it was around a dozen or so.
How many Democrats roughly?
We have no way of telling, although they got a wave of Democrats that came in. Obviously, they got a call from some local union. And we have people that witnessed their leader for these people as they came on the floor. By the way, none of them were wearing credentials, but they were instructed to interfere specifically with the activities of Republican and independent poll challengers.
Who was instructed to do this?
The new batch of ostensibly Democrat poll challengers. I don't even know if they're credentialed or not. They went to the credentials desk and then they got in after that. So apparently they must have had something, but they were not wearing credentials. And when they had a little huddle, we had witnesses that identified the fact that they were being actively encouraged to interfere with our activities. Now, for me, this is anecdotal again. I hate to do all this, but it wasn't like I was running around with my recording button pushed on any of this stuff here. But it's difficult to separate the wheat from the chaff on all this, but it all adds up to what I witnessed in regards to the net effect of some of this. So it's not like it's inconsistent.
Is there anything else that you witnessed that you felt was out of the ordinary about this election process?
The biggest concern is around chain of custody. And so you could say out of the ordinary from every step of the way in that chain of custody. I mean, the role that COVID played in this whole process reared its ugly head well before November 3rd ever came around. We had Republican interested volunteers trying to get data out of the Detroit Elections Bureau. And when they were stonewalled at every single step of the way. They said, sorry, so-and-so's on vacation, or so-and-so's out sick, or so-and-so will only meet with you in person. When you go there in person, then they give you these second report to that person, and you never get to see the main honcho. They said, well, if you call them up, say, well, just send an email. You send an email, there's no response. I mean, it was deliberate obfuscation, step after step. So and you can imagine, for us as poll challengers, we need to understand the process that they're going to follow. Like that simple question I asked Chris Thomas when I got in there. If you don't know what the process is that you're supposed to be following, how are you supposed to verify it?
When you told me that you had witnesses who saw a bunch of new, ostensibly Democrat poll challengers being instructed to interfere with GOP challengers.
Yeah.
Do you have any reports of that actually happening, of GOP challengers being
interfered with? Oh
yes.
We had.
In what way?
And by blocking them so that they can't see the monitor that they're observing. I mean, just penny ante stuff, frankly. It's nothing that's going to sway 100,000 votes at that level. But it was designed, there's an old adage from Saul Alinsky that says it's not the action, it's the reaction that matters. And so there's a strategy, there's a tactic on the part of the Alinskyites that say, keep poking the bear and eventually he's going to use his claw and do something that he's going to regret. That's what I think was happening, so that they could have an incident out there to discredit us as poll challengers. So I don't think in itself it would have swayed 146,000 votes. It was designed to go off and delegitimize anybody who spoke out against the process.
I see.
One other scenario, pre-November 3rd, as far as oddities are concerned. We had volunteers that witnessed a gentleman in a Mercedes pulling out box after box of what looked to be ballots and dropping them off to a side door at the Detroit Elections Bureau. And when they approached him with the camera rolling, the gentleman all of a sudden rushed all the boxes he wasn't able to hand off yet back into the car and sped off.
Is this normal, or is that how we deliver ballots?
It may be normal in Detroit. I'll tell you, Republicans and independents have been so lax at doing the oversight in inner cities like Detroit because, frankly, in the past, I know people have been threatened when they go down and try to do the job of a poll worker or poll challenger in the city of Detroit. We came in force this year. There's about 500 poll challengers through the Election Integrity Fund that were registered, and we're distributing them all over Southeast Michigan. So not all were in Detroit. And there's about 1,200 from the Republican Party. So this year, for the first time in quite a few years, we took the duty of overseeing the safety and integrity of our elections very seriously. And you may have seen some responses by people like LeBron James teaming up with the Detroit Lions to go off and say, oh yeah, we're not going to let these guys go off and challenge our elections. They put out active media campaigns to recruit people to go out there and counter our recruitment efforts. So apparently we got on somebody's radar with that. So I'm concerned all along the way on this stuff, and the fact that as far as whether or not it's typical with other elections, I mean, I can tell you, I just ran for office. I wasn't actively engaged in monitoring the elections, except from a book perspective. So I got a lot of book learning on it. I've done when I got assigned to that committee, I went through our Michigan Elections Manual, and like I said, I diagrammed out all the process, made sure I understood it and well enough so that I could ask, reasonable questions whenever we had testimony. And I'll tell you, I don't think anybody in that Detroit Elections Bureau had any respect for any of the process that we were supposed to be following that night.
How does that affect your confidence in the results?
I have zero. I want to go back into purple finger mode and do a manual count. I mean, this is really getting to be that bad. I don't think there's any way. The chain of custody alone and the obfuscation associated with preventing us from understanding what that chain of custody is, that alone should disqualify all the election results. And you know what we need to be doing from a legal perspective is, anytime you have any precincts that do not balance the night of election, you should not be able to count any of those votes from that precinct. Current Michigan law says that you're counting them all, and even if you go into a recount, they still stand, whatever that count was. We need to get serious about the people we elect to clerk positions. And Janice Winfrey's been in there for I don't know how long, and even if 72% of the precincts did not balance in the last one, which means they're not subject to a recount, that should disqualify anybody from public office. And the only way we're going to get people to take that seriously and that clerk role seriously, because I know a lot of clerks that take their job very seriously. If you're not balanced by one vote in any of those, it's a bad night. If any of their precincts come in there, Detroit has turned into something that it's a badge of honor on how many precincts that are unbalanced. It's not right, and they use that cover to subvert elections because it is an invitation to voter fraud. All you have to do is be able to get that count through the tabulator, those ballots through the tabulator. If you can get to that point, you've won.
And you're seeking a balance between which numbers?
Between the numbers that have been of voters that were validated as having voted in the poll book, and then the number of ballots you have in the machine. We have one of our testimonies, by the way, one of the affidavits that I do know we have, witnessed a gentleman at the tabulator, apparently liked the stack of ballots that he had. He ran the same stack of 50 ballots through 10 times through the tabulator.
Do we know that they were in fact being counted separately?
We can't confirm that. No, we can't confirm that. And we can't confirm that they didn't delete these. A lot of these guys, in fairness, maybe were not trained on how to use the tabulators. We have some indications that a lot of the people that showed up to do this had no idea how to go off and reconcile a jam scan or anything like that. So anyway, that's a data dump of a lot of the stuff that I saw. There's a few other things. I have a website called letsfixstuff.org. And in that website, before I went to sleep the night of the 4th, I mean, I was up to like 12:30 in the morning that night too. So it was like a 48-hour shift. I took my notes on everything that I observed at a high level. And so there's a story called Election Fraud in Michigan that highlights that. There's another story too on why connectivity to the internet is such a concern. And it walks through specific concerns that you should have when you're connected to the internet and references back to some election results in like 2018 with Governor Bevin and also the Ted Cruz Beto O'Rourke election out in Texas and some of the games that were being played there. And it shows how elections can be stolen electronically, not just by process subversion, which we saw. The process subversion is easy to detect. I mean, relatively easy compared to the electronic stuff. The only way electronic stuff is going to be after the fact, and we have to maintain, once again, chain of custody on all the artifacts, computer hardware, and everything that was used on election night. And even then, some people are dubious as to whether or not we'll be able to put Humpty Dumpty back together again on that. But anyway, that's why that chain of custody is so important. There's one other thing on the.
I wanted to circle back to the Mercedes right quick.
Yeah,
this is important.
Yeah.
Did we get any photos or video?
Yes, and I have it right here. I can get to you before we leave.
That'd be great. Thank you.
It's not great. It's not Steven Spielberg quality by any stretch. But it shows an individual. It shows the Mercedes. We actually did get a plate number, and without getting into too much detail, suffice to say, people are investigating what happened with that particular incident.
Do we know that it was boxes of ballots that were being numbered?
We can't say. But,
just boxes.
But yeah, why the heck? Why would he run away? Mm-hmm. Right? If it's just boxes of number 10 blank envelopes, or if it's a bunch of 3x5 cards that are blank, I don't think somebody would be running away, do you?
Right.
We've also witnessed stuff that's happened out at senior centers. Right now, our governor's got it blocked off about visitors, and there's a very tight set of requirements you got to pass in order to get into any of these homes. But yet we have people on the ground that witnessed the same individual going into multiple senior centers with stacks of ballots. What's that for? Who are they processing to? Why is one person going off and playing Johnny Appleseed with all these different ballots? The untold story of this election is how COVID, and they were so smug about it. If you saw the election officials on election night, it wasn't even.
You're talking about COVID, the untold story here about COVID.
Yeah, so leading up to the election, first of all, on March 23rd, our governor put forward her first executive order, essentially locking down our state. And her state of emergency authority is limited under a 1976 statute called PA 390, and to just 28 days without legislative approval. And the legislature, as of April 30th, did not extend authority for her to issue orders under a state of emergency, which gave her extremely broad powers. And she assumed more than she was allocated to, but that's a different discussion around constitutional authority. Bottom line is, it wasn't until October 2nd that we had the Michigan Supreme Court, in a unanimous ruling, dictate that all of her emergency orders after April 30th that depended upon a state of emergency being declared were null and void. That was a unanimous decision. The governor, however, has been pitching it as a partisan decision for political reasons. So why is that important? Because right after that decision came out on October 2nd, the governor put out a note or press release that said, well, wait a minute, they didn't mean that right away. We got 21 days, and then later she amended it to 28 days to go off and comply with that order. That's October 2nd, 28 days.
So the governor's just saying, I'm not going to comply with a state Supreme Court order until I decide it's time to comply.
Yes. And so she pushed that out. And keep in mind, 28 days, that's now we're getting to October 30th. Guess when all the poll workers have to be trained by pretty much for a November 3rd election. So they were all sent essentially, and we did get a lot of pushback by some of the poll workers. They were trained on compliance with a bogus set of orders coming from the governor. And so, matter of fact, one of the orders that came out said that poll challengers couldn't get within 6 feet of a poll worker. And we have video footage of an election official, and I can't give you details as to who the person was. I know who actually recorded this, but one of the poll workers that was there was being instructed on ways to inhibit a poll challenger from executing their duties by putting up their desk against the wall so that there wasn't 6 feet between them so that the poll challenger couldn't observe what they were working on. This is actually recorded instruction from one of the trainers, ostensibly an election official with either the city of Detroit or the state of Michigan, telling them how to violate the law and that they should violate the law.
How to impede a poll challenger.
Right.
And are they expressing that intent? This is how you defeat a poll challenger? Or are they just saying this is how you protect yourself from COVID?
Go to bigleaguepolitics.com. And the gentleman who put up the video, his name is Shane Trejo. He said it's okay to go off and release his name on this. He pulled together a video based on audio captured by an individual by the name of Adam DeAngelis. He was the one actually going through the training. And he's a former staffer for Representative Gary Glenn. So he, at the last second, decided maybe I should push the record button on this. And he did. And the stuff that we heard coming out of that was pretty damning. So I would submit that this pursuit of obstruction was part of the plan well before November 3rd.
I see. So I just really have one final question for you. There's going to be some people who see this interview and they're going to say, Detroit and some of these other big cities, they're just a few small localities. It's just local to Detroit. But in the case of the 2020 election, how does this have consequences for the entire state of Michigan?
And for the entire nation, I would submit. Here's the consequence. So here's the narrative that's coming out of the mainstream media right now. There is no such thing as widespread voter fraud, right? That's what we're hearing time after time after time. Guys, it doesn't have to be widespread to be significant. I may have voter fraud in only one county in the state of Michigan. But if that county is Wayne County, the most populous county in the whole state, there could be an issue there, right? Right now, they're going through the Board of Canvassers, going off and trying to settle all the scores that they did not clean up in Detroit right now for all those precincts. They're trying to make sure that they reconcile and balance. If you have that process perturbed or disturbed in any way, where it's subverted in any way, that's a big deal. That potentially impacts hundreds of thousands of votes. That's just one county. So it doesn't have to be in all the other counties. Up in Chippewa County, they may have everything nailed down to a T, not a big deal. So it's not widespread in the context that it's not affecting the UP, but you know what? It's affecting the most populous area where they've got specific operatives, including one of the owners of Dominion Voting Systems, present at the polls at that time. Apparently some areas of the state are more important than others. And so it does not have to be widespread to be significant. And what I would submit to them is If you've got the opportunity to go off and sway that many votes, and we knew, let's just put on our little political hat here for a second. And from a demographics perspective, we knew Trump was doing very well among the Black community. And I can attest to that as somebody who is a resident of Wayne County, and a lot of the rallies we went to, I mean, this was not the usual monolithic demographic that was attending. These were people from all races and creeds and everything. They were just sick and tired of what they'd seen happening with the Democratic Party, with the riots and all this craziness that was going on. They said, enough is enough. We're behind our president. You can't tell me that 100% of the votes in certain precincts or at certain times of night were going towards Joe Biden, even in the city of Detroit. It just does not pass a sniff test. And so for the folks that are saying it has to be widespread to be valid, no, it doesn't.
Did you see that? Were there points in the night where all the votes were going for Joe Biden?
I've only heard the anecdote. We don't see the vote tallies. You know, when we're a poll challenger, they won't let us anywhere near the election official stage. They have it cordoned off with little barricades and everything else. And whenever I tried to scoot near it, that's when the IT worker said, you can't come near here. And I can tell you during the night, I wish I had binoculars to see some of the stuff that was going on there. On their screens where they're doing mass file transfers up on the stage. And I really was very curious to see what was really going on there. But having said that, I want to make sure we understand that the narrative right now that's being pushed right now by the Biden campaign is that he's president-elect. And he's going to use the mainstream media to push that narrative until everybody who understands that this was not a free and fair election just kind of buckle over and become fatalistic and say, I guess we're just going to have to deal with it. That's what they're pushing for right now. So we're in a race. We're in a race between them being successful at mollifying the majority of Americans into believing a falsehood that Joe Biden is our president-elect, as nominated by the media, versus letting the legal process, which is historically very slow and potentially cumbersome, we got to let that take its course and get the real truth out about what happened in this election. If it turns out, when it's all said and done, that the chain of custody explanations are there and they come out in testimony in court, you know, and after that's all said and done, Joe Biden has enough votes to become president, so be it. I'll bite my lip just like I did when President Obama won 2 terms on it, and I'll be a good citizen and move forward. But I'll tell you, if we don't get assurance that this is a free and fair election, people are going to be upset, and they should be upset. And it's not just about this election; it's about confidence in our system of government. And back since 2008, Barack Obama said we are 5 days away from the fundamental transformation of America. I've seen step by step how they've implemented this fundamental transformation. There are people that refuse to believe that America is something worth preserving. And so there's this battle between those who want to fundamentally transform America and those who want to fundamentally preserve it. And we've seen this battle take place in a lot of different forms in the 4 years that President Trump's been in office. We saw it with the Russian collusion narrative, the fake Russian narrative. We've seen it with the impeachment trial. We've seen how they're trying to undermine our system of government with these riots by undermining the role that police play, right? So the whole defund police movement with Black Lives Matter, which they show their fist, that fist is a Marxist symbol. Everybody needs to understand the origins of it. And the founders of that movement are avowed Marxists. They're not even apologetic about it. They know that they're Marxists. Those are people who want to fundamentally transform America, and they're doing it by attacking police officers that are doing their job. They're undermining the rule of law. So it's no surprise when you start looking at election integrity, which really is a bunch of laws and a bunch of rules that people are supposed to follow. In the wake of that history, ever since 2008, frankly, it should be of no surprise that these are the same people that have no respect for election integrity and the process we're supposed to be following right now. So I guess that's kind of a wrap-up big picture from my perspective.
Yes, I do need to ask you about one more thing I just thought of. Sorry,
Sure.
I'll let you get out of here. So your lawsuit was filed.
Yes.
I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about it. You gave us so much great detail on the other things that I almost forgot to ask you about it.
Yeah.
But that's very timely, so we need to.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, because we were up till the wee hours last night getting all the details put together on that.
So tell us who you sued and why.
The Great Lakes Justice Center sued state of Michigan. I was going to bring the actual copy. I'll get you a copy of the actual lawsuit if you want, along with the press release associated with it. Bottom line is what we're talking about with chain of custody. I mean, that's one of the key things in there.
Which we covered.
Which we talked about. We didn't really talk about the backdating. Oh, maybe we did. The backdating envelopes. And
we have not covered that.
Okay, so poll workers were actually instructed to backdate thousands of envelopes from November 4th to November 2nd. We have signed affidavits to that effect, and it's an actual poll worker that was instructed by, and I got to double check on this, but I believe it was Chris Thomas. So he's one of those three head honchos sitting up on the stage in the counting board. There's a variety of other items that were in there, and I can't remember which ones we've covered versus not covered on it. The fact that ballots were being processed in the tabulation machine, even though they had no validation of the identity of that voter, that's a no-no, as we were talking about before. Unfortunately, this whole process, you got to take a systems view of it to understand what it is. All these other items, onesie, twosie, you know, the mainstream media can just poo-poo it and say, well, that's not going to shift 146,000 votes, so why do we even give it any attention, right? But as a total, you go off and look at how many dead voters actually voted. I mean, they were backdating some of these envelopes so that they were saying that in the poll book that these people were born in 1900. So we have a lot of 120-year-olds, which should factor well into a pure Michigan campaign because people live longer here than anywhere else in the world. Those are all suspect, and I'll give you the full detailed breakout of all the different affidavits. Included in that lawsuit is my affidavit around the technology, including what we talked about today. So what I confirmed around the technology configuration, that's what we put into there, and I've got a ton of pictures and stuff like that I can send you and share with you as well.
And just tell me right quick for the audience, what's the significance of the birth dates?
So, well, first of all, that's data that's going into the qualified voter file. So if you can verify, if somebody comes up to you and it looks like they're barely graduated from high school and that name correlates to somebody with a birth date of the 1900s, well, you might be a little suspect. It's part of the verification process of the identity of the voter.
And in the case of this election in Wayne County, what was different?
They were typing in, they were adding in new voters into the poll book, i.e. the extract was supposed to be frozen, that frozen extract of qualified voters here in the state of Michigan. They were adding them in and giving them all the 1900 birth year.
Why would they have used 1900? I mean, let's say they weren't doing something shady. What would be the point of such an obvious fabrication?
Well, I think it was just for simplicity for them. And from a guy who's worked with a lot of databases, if you want to flag something for further follow-up, you could go in and just filter for all the 1900s. And by the way, we have some people that have been monitoring the Secretary of State qualified voter file database because you can access that online and check individuals on it. What they're seeing are that people that were registered prior to November 3rd all of a sudden have disappeared post November 3rd. So, to your point around the 1900 flag,
why would they want people to disappear who were registered before November 3rd?
That's a good question for a Secretary of State. And one reason is, from a database admin guy like I've been in the past on it, is that you can run an easy filter on all the 1900 dates and say, all these guys I need to delete from the database to clean up your rolls after the fact. And if that's the case, that's a violation of federal statute, not state statute, because you're required, particularly in a federal election, to retain records for, I think it's like 30 days afterwards. And we have people that are working on this right now. And once again, I don't know if the affidavit's been signed yet, but they told me that they actually took video of the deletions of the before and after of the database with timestamps on it.
So just help me understand here, because I feel this point is crucial.
Yeah.
If they're removing people from the qualified voter file,
yeah,
is it your opinion that if there was something fraudulent in doing so, that it would be because they're removing legitimate voters, or that they would be deleting evidence of fraud that was committed on certain registrations because of the...
Considering that those 1900 dates correlated to voters that were added on election day as a means of getting these voters through the tabulation machine and past the poll books, I would submit it's the latter, not the former.
So what happens if there's a recount then? And these entries actually.
Well, that's the beauty of it all, right? Because now you got a bunch of ballots that don't correspond with what the poll book says potentially, and so you've got a unbalanced precinct. And when you have an unbalanced precinct, guess what? All those votes count. There's no way of going off and saying which votes were invalid, which ones were valid. So
even a recount can't fix this?
No.
So what relief are you seeking from the courts then?
Well, you'll notice in the lawsuit, if I remember the last thing that they told me that we were going to pursue, because this was up in the air quite a bit on the lawsuit, and frankly, I've been on media so long today that I haven't had a chance to go off and read all of it. The strategy was to pursue a revote. Now, there's an issue with the revote as well, because that's why we had such a debate on it. That everybody was talking about the 25th Amendment and when that comes in play, because it's never happened before, not in context of an election being contested. And so if we don't have resolution of who the next president is by January 20th, it's conceivable that Speaker Pelosi could be the next president.
Interesting.
Nothing's clear on that. And this is going to be in court battles. We're in terra incognita on a lot of key constitutional as well as statutory issues. In Michigan, the 2018 ballot proposal that was passed had a stipulation in there around the right of the people to perform an audit on the process. So in Michigan, I believe we've got the path to go off and examine the election process beyond the normal recount statute, if you will. So we'll see how that goes. Bottom line is, if we go off and all of our claims in this lawsuit are validated at the end of the day, that's grounds for saying something's rotten in Denmark here. There are criminal prosecutions, not just civil prosecution. This isn't just, and it has the implications not just for Michigan, but for the nation as a whole, because our 16 electoral college votes can make the difference between President Trump and President Biden right now.
Right. As it stands, I believe
it's 290.
It's 290 for Biden, but there's similar lawsuits going on in Pennsylvania, which is 20 electoral votes. So if that were to flip, this suddenly becomes a huge issue.
And there's 11 electoral college votes that I'm told are going to flip back to Republican in Arizona.
Right.
So if that flips, and Michigan, that 16 votes goes back into the win column for President Trump, completely different. And here's the big worry on all this. Because the Biden campaign has hyped this up so much already, and they've declared victory, and they're doing their victory lap, all their supporters are off expending a lot of energy and jubilation right now. How do you think that energy is being expended once the truth of what happened comes out? And everybody realizes, no, that was a sham. The media elected him, but the people didn't. What do you think the reaction is going to be? I think we're going to see a lot worse than Portland, Seattle, Minneapolis, Kenosha. We're going to see that all across the country. And Biden and the media are to blame for that, from my perspective. And they need to do what they can right now to head that off at the pass. Because I'm telling you, that's going to happen. When the truth comes out about this, I'm confident we're going to have a different set of affairs for January 20th.
Just one more question for you, sir. Did anybody offer you any sort of compensation to come here and talk to me today?
You gave me a bottle of water.
Yes, I did do that.
So that's it.
Okay. Thank you very much, Senator.
Hey, thank you.